couple things before we get started. And one is that I really appreciate all of you being here. This is such a small group of students when you really think about the other students with other disabilities. If we think about it, it's approximately 1 to 2 students who have a combined vision and hearing loss, but it's 1 to 2 students out of every 1,000 special ed students. So for some of the small districts, and I know some of you are coming from them, you could go 20 years and not have a student who has a combined vision and hearing loss. And so we appreciate your being here to try to provide a program and to understand this group of students because they are so diverse. So first of all, I'd like to thank all of you for that. Secondly, we are going to be showing some videos this afternoon, and as always, I'd like to appreciate and thank the kids, their families, and you, the service providers in many cases, for allowing us to do this. Because without that, we would not be able to demonstrate some of the skills to demonstrate who this population of students is. So there are a couple new things for any of you who've been on Illuminate webinars before with our project. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently. One was having Katie help moderate so that she could keep an eye on the chat room as I do a presentation, and either call my attention to ask a question that I missed picking up as I'm trying to present, and also answering for me because of her background in deafblindness. Secondly, I also want to mention to you that later, towards the end of the presentation, there will be an evaluation. And it's a very quick, simple evaluation. It's done with SurveyMonkey, and Michaela will type that in the chat box later as we get closer to the end, and if you would just click on that and then go answer those questions for us, we would really appreciate it. It gives us feedback and some assistance in knowing what kinds of things we missed that you were interested in we didn't think of, or that we're answering questions with too many initials and acronyms that people aren't aware of. We have both families as well as service providers on this session, so just be aware of that. And I want to welcome the families also. Also, for those of you who might be interested in a PDF document of this PowerPoint that I'm going to be going through, we would be happy to email that to you, or we will probably send you a link because sometimes those emails, they get long and you can't get them on your computer. So we'll email you a link that you can go to, and then you can print it off from there if you want. That was a request made after last year's webinars. So I think I want to start with the issue that the real question that we're trying to answer today is, who are these children with the combined vision and hearing loss? And for some children, they are deaf and blind combined. But for some children, it's a combined vision and hearing loss. So we might know them by what we say about them. And here's some of the things that we hear ourselves, meaning all of us, say about these students. One is, the records say his hearing is fine. He loves music. That's one of the kinds of questions or comments we hear from families and from school districts, thinking that as long as a child can appreciate and love music and clearly indicate to you that he likes music, then he must hear fine. He may be hearing, but he may not be interpreting what it is we're saying to him. So all of our talking at him is not giving him the information that he needs to gain concepts and to be able to communicate. Another thing we sometimes say is, well, you know, he hears when he wants to and he sees when he wants to. And an example that we had a couple years ago was one of the comments made was, you know, he'll go to his toy right away, and it can be in the middle of the floor with other things around it. And one of the comments, one of the consultants said is, and if that's a very comfortable toy for him, he will recognize it, but he doesn't recognize anything else around there because it's different. So that's one of those things. We also have simple tests. You know, people say, well, why can't we just test their hearing? And the problem is for some of our students who are not verbal and can't give that kind of an indication, there are some tests we can do, but they can be uncomfortable, I don't mean hurting, but uncomfortable to the child to take, or they have to be sedated. And for some of the children that we work with, the sedation is an issue because that could be life-threatening for them. So don't make an assumption that somebody hasn't done what they should have done because you don't have a good hearing assessment or you don't have a good vision assessment too. So what I'd like to do now is show you a video, but I want to talk a little bit about this first. We are showing the videos via something called Vimeo, V-I-M-E-O, and as Michaela brings it up, you're going to notice it, and don't think that all of a sudden you went to some other website. We did, but we did it on purpose because this is how we're going to show the videos. In this case, when I will need you, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner of the video screen, you'll see an arrow. Please don't push it yet. but you are actually going to be running the video. So we're all going to end at slightly a different time, but you're going to be able to see it, and we hope more people will be able to see it than saw it when we loaded it through Illuminate last year. So what I'd like you to do is notice this video. We're going to be showing you about 7 students, and I want you to start to look at what is the difference between these children. They're very different in many ways, and just maybe if you have a piece of paper there, you could just jot down some things you're noticing as you're going through those videos. And say to yourself, oh, I noticed this about him, or I noticed that I think this one doesn't hear, or I think he does hear, or he's little, or he's got other disabilities. Whatever it is you want to jot down, I want you to look about this population of kids and how different they are. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to say, go ahead and push the play screen, and when you're done, first of all, could I ask you, right underneath the participants window, there is a green check. If you see this video, it says Joel in a box. Could you push the green check so I know how many of you are seeing it? I'm just waiting a minute here. It looks like most people are getting it. We have a few people that haven't yet. Allison Yakima, you're not able to see it. Okay, it looks. Michaela, do you want to talk to Alice, or do you want to? Okay. All righty. Most people are, so we're going to go ahead and show it, and I understand. And I know if you would type your question or comment, Jean, in the box, that would be helpful. Thanks. Okay, if you'll go ahead and push the play button on Joel, we'll all go ahead and watch it.
Should get that.
He doesn't know where he's at. He'll put his hand down and try and figure out where he's at.
Do you want to go? Go. Do you want to go? Go more.
And if you could check if you're done watching the green arrow again, that would help me know that people are done watching. Just take a moment and jot yourself a few notes about that child. Jean. Oh. Okay, thanks, Jill. We're going to, with this being the first of the series, we'll try to iron out some of the glitches, but we're hoping this works. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more, and as we're going along, we're going to do our very best to be responsive. And so another comment that we get is he has normal hearing in one ear, or he has normal vision in one eye, and that whole issue starts to become one of, so if you just have one eye that works or one ear that works, what if both the eye that doesn't work and the ear that doesn't work is on the same side or on opposite sides of your head? What does that do? That is not just a child who is typically developing with their vision and hearing. I know she has normal hearing, but she is 6 years old, and I'm still not sure if she understands what we are saying. And those are comments that we frequently are told, that I talk to her all the time, but I don't have any information that she actually can respond. And it may be that the child has some other physical disabilities that she or he cannot respond in a way that you and I would understand, that they understand what we're saying. Okay? Keep in mind, too, as you're watching these videos, I'd like you to think in terms of the environment. So the environment Joel was in the living room or the family room of his home. He was with just his parents, okay, and a visitor who happened to be a deafblind consultant. So think in terms of visually what was going on during that time. Was it very cluttered and distracting? Think about the classroom that you may be in and teaching in, or that the families that your child is in. How visually distracting or difficult or cluttered are those classrooms? Is there an area that that student can sometimes better be in because it's less distracting? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and look at the next video. This is, again, I want you to take a look at what are some of the things that you notice about the child. So we're, again, talking about the diversity of the child. And this basically does not have video other than music at the beginning, at the end, for those of you who may be wondering why you can't hear the conversation. And I really want you to pay attention to the child and what kind of information and reactions she has. Okay? Once again, look down to the bottom of the video screen and see the arrow, and let's go ahead and click it to play. Okay, would you please put a green check if you had a chance to finish watching the video? Okay? So again, I ask you to take a couple notes and just jot down a couple things that you noticed about this little girl that may be different from what you noticed about Joel. Also think in terms of the fact of how she shared her emotion and that there was something that happened as a result of it. Again, we get comments made, or we make comments, is she has so many other needs. A mild hearing loss is the least of her concerns. He has a significant intellectual disability. We wouldn't expect him to use his vision. That's also a comment that we hear from people. And it's like, and who told you that because a person has a cognitive or intellectual disability is that they can't use their vision? So sometimes the fact that the vision or hearing loss may be mild or not extensive, not profound or severe, people don't give as much concern. They don't have as much concern about that. Okay? What I'd like to do now is go ahead and show you a video of a young man with an active learning device, which is called a triangle board. And again, jot a couple notes as you're watching him in this video about what are some different things you notice about him. And it's just coming up on the screen. Also think about the difference between what you see him doing before he has that device, the triangle board, and after he gets the device. All right, let's go ahead and play it.
So is this normally the time, so 10:18 you go?
Hey, I'm back. I just had to dance something. Oh, fingers out. Fingers out. Pretend the right. You reach those, Mario? Let's keep
If you would check one more time if you saw it by using the green check. Great, thanks. So again, thinking about the young man that you just saw with the triangle board, what were some of the differences in what he was doing before he got engaged with it? What are the difference between him and Joel, who you saw in the box, or Teresa, who you saw with Mark, the man with the hand conversation that was going on between them? Keep in mind that we're looking at all those differences because all of these students qualify and can be served through the Deafblind Project, which is part of Washington Sensory Disability Services. Another comment that we often hear is, well, he's just deaf, but he is sort of clumsy, and his eyes bother him when he's outside in the sunshine. These are comments we start to hear from people, but he's just deaf. So I'd like to go ahead and show another video. And this is a young girl who has Usher syndrome, and she is talking about how her interpreter assists her and what kinds of things happen for her. And Usher syndrome, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a condition where the child is either born deaf or maybe hard of hearing, and then over a period of time starts to lose their vision. And a reminder that it's your peripheral vision, and that is if I put my hands in front of my eyes and I go like this, it tends to constrict a lot of the vision that I would have out here that would give me a lot more information. And that's a very simple and not terribly accurate description, but I just want to give it to you so we can go over, okay? So with this, again, just push the white play arrow once, and we'll listen and watch.
She's very good support. She enlarges text so I can read it. She lets me know when there's things I might trip over. She's always telling me what's going on. What else? She just does tons of things. Oh yeah, she does tactile interpreting. Like if it's hard to see because someone's too far away, she'll interpret for me so I can get it. And another thing, if it's bright when we go to work outside or whatever, she'll interpret for me so I know what's going on. She's very good support. Okay,
again, asking that you take a look at what are the differences between this young girl and some of the other people we've seen, Joel and Mario and Teresa, and this is Marissa. So just keep jotting yourself some notes so that we can really talk about how different these children are even from each other. Here's another comment. I know she has a syndrome. Oh yeah, it's called charge, but the eye doctor said her vision is fine. And there are possibilities that a child's vision can, quote, be fine, but there are other effects. And charge syndrome has some issues in the vestibular sense area and in the proprioceptive, which affect their vision, their balance, and a variety of other things. So keep in mind that there are a set of syndromes and conditions that tend to lend themselves to a child having both a vision and a hearing loss, and it can be severe or it could be more mild. Another comment, she has cerebral palsy in addition to her hearing loss. I don't know anything about a vision problem. Well, what I can share with you is that 50% of all people, all children who have cerebral palsy have a vision problem. Many times it's muscular and can be corrected by surgery, and sometimes even with the surgery, it's not corrected. And there are other vision conditions also besides muscle problems. I know this child had head trauma very early in his life. He has a cortical visual impairment, but there's nothing about a hearing problem. I'm not sure if he understands anything I'm saying. And again, a child who may have head trauma early in his life or even later may end up not just having the problem of a cortical vision impairment, meaning that his eyes work fine. If somebody's going to look at his eyes, they'd say they're healthy, they're good, he can see. The problem is that once it goes back and moves up to the brain, he's not able to interpret in the same way that he used to be able to if it happened later in his life. Same thing is true with hearing. It used to be a very long time ago, when the dinosaur days when I was getting my training, that they actually called it a cortical hearing loss. Now they don't. They have a variety of things they say about it, but this child is having trouble interpreting what he's hearing. So keep that in mind. These children may be at home with significant health challenges so that they're served by a visiting teacher or an OT/PT in the home. They may be in a classroom with other deaf children, but no one knows yet that they're starting to have vision problems, that the glare off the whiteboard is a problem, that if they're too far away, they're not seen. If they go outside, they're temporarily blind until their eyes readjust. And same thing when they come in from recess or come in from being outside in the bright sunlight. They may have a mild hearing loss and wear glasses, but no one realizes that the glare on that whiteboard or the sunlight bothers them. They're not seen as well as we think. And yet they are very good accommodators. And so they find ways to not look like they're having a problem. They may be finding ways to compensate for their loss of vision or hearing and are near grade level, but have even higher potential and are exhausted at the end of the day. Doing homework becomes so hard. Or they find school miserable because no one understands their communication. And I'm just always amazed sometimes that kids keep coming back for more when we don't know what we don't know. There are several ways that we refer to this group of students. They may have combined visual impairment and hearing loss. Some people refer to that. Others may say combined vision and hearing loss. Others may say dual sensory impairments, meaning a vision and hearing problem. Others may call it deaf blindness, and that's a category in the United States IDEA Federal Register as well as Washington that talks about the fact that that's a category of students. And then you'll also see it referred to as deaf blindness without the hyphen, meaning the deaf blindness is not just deafness and blindness, but when you put them together, it multiplies and it becomes a different disability, having elements of both, but also some elements of its own. Okay. So these are the definitions. The first definition, as you can see, is the one that's the federal regulation. The other one is in the WAC, Washington. You'll see one difference, and that's at the very bottom of the second one of the WAC, where it says, and adversely affects a student's educational performance. You'll see that causes such severe communication and other developmental and educational needs. So think in terms of the fact that you have kids go to school, and what are the two senses we use the most unless we're in a kindergarten preschool classroom? We're talking about vision and hearing all the time. People are talking, they're explaining, they're giving information, they're asking questions, or they're showing you something, talking about it, pointing to it, and you're looking at it. Something happens and there's a loud noise in the back of the room and everybody turns because their hearing pulled them to see what it was, because it may not be something they know what it is, and it might have been the door slamming or the garbage can falling over or whatever. But for those kids, it starts to become a much bigger deal. And they can't just function as a child with a vision loss or as a child with a hearing loss. That it has to be combined and there have to be some different kinds of programmatic things done. Okay, this is the state of Washington, and this is actually the 2009 census. So for some of you, I know some of you are on here, and your student may not be showing up in this area yet because this is from last year. But as you can see, they're pretty well dispersed across the state, depending upon the population, the amount of population. You would expect to see more on the west side because it's larger population. And students in Washington, this gives you an idea of the hereditary, first of all, hereditary and chromosomal syndromes like Usher's and Charge that we talked about. That accounts for 45% of the students have some kind of a condition. In the prenatal congenital complications, you're talking about 21%. Postnatal non-congenital complications, you're talking about 56 or 25%, and related to prematurity, 9%. What I would like to say about that is that we're going to show our website in a little bit, and you may have seen it on the first slide, but we'll show it again. And for those of you who don't know it, I'm going to ask Michaela to type it in, and it's www.wsdsonline.org. And if you go, our project serves kids who are deaf and hard of hearing, who are blind, visually impaired, and who are deafblind. And so you want to go to the deafblind section, and there will actually be information. We did an update. It's called DB Update, and it gives information specifically about the 2009 census and how many students have certain conditions, which are the more prominent and prevalent conditions. So you're welcome to go there and take a look at all of that. Now I would like to just take a minute and have you guys get just ready to type in, and I want to watch the chat box for a minute or two. Give me some descriptors of things that you noticed about the variety of students that we've already shown in the videotape that are part of this combined vision and hearing loss that you noticed that are different from each other. So go ahead and start typing those in. You can talk about the difference in age or vision or hearing or whatever else you noticed. So I'll just give you a minute to start typing. Different mobility levels, correct. Some were mobile, some were not, or ambulatory, some people use that term. Great, thanks, Mona. I hope I don't mess up anybody's name. Difference in communication skills. Great, Pat. Jean, difference in communication skill. Yeah, active communication or little evident communication. Physical issues. Thanks, Rita and Fran. Laurie, notice that one uses a picture communication. Right. Different responses to tactile and vestibular input. Excellent observation, Michelle. I liked seeing a more cognitively typical student. That middle school girl seemed more typical. Right, and this is a student, one of the few. Now we had, according to the 2009 census, we had 222 students on that census who were identified as deafblind or having a combined vision and hearing loss. Out of that, 217 out of the 222 had at least one additional disability in addition to the vision and the hearing loss. So you don't very often see students who have just a vision and hearing loss. And please don't take it that I think just a vision and hearing loss is easy, because it's not. But it is great to see the more typical student too. And this is a student who had a lot more vision early in her life when she was young, and then slowly started to lose it. So those are things we have to remember too, is did I always have this vision loss, or has the vision loss gotten worse? I think Danielle introduced herself as a parent of a son who is visually impaired, who's blind, and has a degenerative hearing loss. And so how it was when he was 5 is different than how it is today when he's, I think it's 14, Danielle, I hope. And Marina talks about, I had no idea that children were strongly challenged physically. I noticed both Mario and Teresa seemed upset when first introduced to things. A very typical response when you don't have such great vision. You may not have great hearing, and then on top of that, you may have some issues that are sensory, so that your response is difficult. Or if I never know what something is that's coming into my hand, why would I ever want to touch it? And we all talk about learned helplessness, and the reality of it is, or tactily defensive, and in some cases what we do is we're the culprits, myself included. I mean, everything I share with you, I've done wrong, I can promise you. And so, you know, we all have to remember that. Manipulation and hand coordination skills. How they take in the information, like through the mouth or through touch. What was Mario learning by putting those items in his mouth? Some self-stim when not actively engaged, and we talk about it being self-stim. So for children who can't see or hear or have impaired hearing and seeing, and they can't get to things and no one brings things to them, what do they have available? Their bodies. And so many times we end up having kids who are, quote, self-stimming, which I don't like to use in most cases. So I think that that's an important piece, is what do they have available to explore with. Right, Katie, if I don't know what's coming into my hand, why would I want to touch it? And I'm sorry, is it Charlie? Or the adjustment to stimulation times varied. And also, for children who can't see and hear, when no one brings things to them, what do they have available to interact with? Oh, I guess that's Katie writing what I said. Excuse me, we'll just go on. Oh, thanks, Crystal. Thanks for clearing that up. So those are some things that you want to think about. Feel free to go to that website and look. And what are the two senses that are used most for communication and learning in school? And of course, they're your vision and their hearing. Some facts about school in general. Estimated 80 to 90% of learning comes through vision, especially at the younger age. What was that? Do you know what that is? I don't know what that is in the top of the screen. Does anybody have a thought about that? Very strange. So mild visual impairment or minimal visual impairment, you'll hear that. Glasses do not correct everything. And as you notice, each one of these kids is looking at this piece of gymnastic equipment, and they all see something different. Okay, whoops, where did that go? All right. So I would like us to go see one more child, and her name is Paige, and she's with her interpreter. And see if you see anything else you would say about her that we haven't already said about the other students. And she's coming, whoops, oh, hang on, she's coming soon. Okay, so if we'll all go ahead and hit the play button, that would be great.
No scribble. You're going to be careful, right? Right? Watch what you do. Little line, little line, little line. Ready to do a P down here? Your big line, and then the curve. Okay. Okay, now, here. You do one. Big line.
Okay, any other comments about what you were seeing that you maybe didn't see with the other children that we've looked at so far? Right, she didn't always look at the object or the interpreter. Hand under hand. The fact that the interpreter was putting her hand under instead of taking and putting her hand on top. Let me find it there, on top. Okay. Left, right, who knows? Love the hand under hand technique, very helpful. For some reason, I did not get connected to that video. Okay. Student acknowledging the adult and allowing the facilitation for success. And that always doesn't start that way. It's because that interpreter is developing a relationship with that student. And on top of developing the relationship is respectful of her hands. And a young man who was blind and severely hearing impaired, something his mom said to me years ago really affected me. And that was, she said, when you put your hands on top of my son's hands, you are covering his eyes. And that's a good one for me to really pay attention to. And Lori, that's a good one. I noticed that her head is tipped to one side. that's the other thing is people say, you know, pay attention, look at me straight on. And if some of our students are looking at me straight on, they're actually seeing the lamp or the window over to the left or the right. They're not seeing it. So that idea, great observation, that, you know, that child tilts her head and she looks a certain way, that must be a way that works for her. Okay. I want to go on with some of these vision and hearing facts in general ed. It is estimated that 40 to 60% of communication in a classroom is auditory. Studies show that most classrooms around the world, not just in the U.S., have too much noise and reverberation even for students with typical normal hearing, meaning that I talk, the sound waves go out, and then they start bouncing off hard surfaces in the room. So even more noise becomes an issue. Hearing aids or cochlear implants do not correct everything, just the way glasses don't. And yet those of us who wear glasses and get corrected to 20/20 by wearing our glasses or very close to it, we just think people wear glasses and then they see just like we do. And it's not true at all. And we make those assumptions. So you really need to find out, why is that child wearing the glasses? How frequently has that child seen? If he's looking over the top of his glasses like this, then you start to look at that and say, okay, wait a minute, are these glasses not working for him? Or maybe it's just distance. Does he need bifocals? Those kinds of things. On any one day in an elementary school, you can expect 1/4 to 1/3 of all your students to have a hearing loss. And that would be due to ear infections, stopped up sinuses, all those kinds of things. With 25 students and 1 teacher in the classroom, the noise level can reach from 55 to 75 dB. Think about some of the children we saw in the videos and where it was noisy versus where it was quiet. And what would be the difference for a child who maybe has a moderate or mild hearing loss being in that quiet environment versus being in the noisy environment? 90% of knowledge acquired by a young child is learned incidentally, meaning I learn by watching what's happening around me. For the child who has a combined vision and hearing loss, they don't have the opportunity to notice all those things that are happening that they just learn incidentally. For example, how does a child learn that they're not supposed to ask older people how old they are? Well, once they're probably told by their parents that that wasn't polite, but after that, they're pretty well, they notice nobody seems to ask that question. And yet we as adults ask them that question all the time. Once again, that little difference between kids and adults. Also, if 2 ears can discriminate 90% of a message at 40 decibels. Okay, so remember, we were talking about a classroom being 55 to 75. That's way higher. 1 ear by itself will only discriminate 72% of that message. So again, for children who have a mild or minimal hearing or vision loss, we're running into the same thing. They're put in an environment in which they are even further handicapped. Students with unilateral hearing loss, meaning on one side only, have been found to perform 1 to 2 years behind hearing students on standardized academic tests. They may have difficulties developing the appropriate social skills due to occasional barriers in communication. I may not hear 2 things that you said because it was too loud, and you said it to our friend, and then I asked the same question, and they're both looking at me like, what's wrong with you, dummy? I already answered that question. So that whole social piece is there also. Did you know that a voice heard clearly at 40 feet away with 2 ears can barely be heard 10 feet away with 1 ear? Those are things people don't talk about, but this is true for kids. And there are kids who have a unilateral hearing loss that no one is even seating them in the right place. And seating alone isn't going to do it. And I just thought this was funny because it's that whole thing about we all think we heard what we heard. And so the first lady says, well, do you want to eat? And the other one says, yeah, I'm pretty beat. No, I can't eat meat, says the third one. You have problems with your feet? says the fourth one. Well, who in the heck is Pete, says the fifth one. And that's how it starts to get, that we start thinking that we heard what somebody said, and we didn't. We missed it. And that's a very important piece for us to be thinking about for the kids who have that, quote, mild or minimal issue. We talked, this is about planning for success. And so success comes from knowledge, and I'm hoping that some of the information that I shared earlier will help you gain some knowledge you didn't know you had. There are ways to assist an environment in being quieter and less visually cluttered, for those of you who may be interested in doing that for a part of the room or for your whole classroom. And remember what I said earlier, what the research tells us is that all schools are noisier, and that's not helpful. And how do we help change some of the environment to help quiet that down instead of just telling the kids, you know, nobody can talk because we've got to keep the room quiet. And there, of course, are devices that we use, too. This is interesting. Crystal said, would a student's hitting behavior be related to the volume of the input? How do you determine if it's lighting glare versus the auditory input? What kinds of things can you change? What can you do for a while and then stop and see if it changes? What can you do for a while? Or is there an environment, Crystal, that student does better in and has less hitting behaviors? And what's different about that environment? Is it more visually calming, or is it more calming sound-wise? Or is it the activity, that the student gets lost in the activity and is enjoying himself, and it's easier for him to block some of that out? Or he doesn't have to do as much communication in that activity. So somebody said to me, well, you know, he went to PE, and what happened in PE was he did fine, but that is such a noisy, echoing environment. What in the heck? You know, what's that all about? And my response was, well, he didn't have to communicate much. He knew the game. So he could kind of go on his own some. So there are different things to look at, but that's a great question. And what you want to do is, you know, I keep telling people, if you enjoy mysteries, you probably enjoy working with this group of kids because you have to keep sorting out little details to figure out, oh, is this going to work? Well, I'll try it this way, and then I'll go back and try it this other way. So those are some things that you can start to talk about with your team and the family. The family may be able to share with you that, you know, we've noticed that all of a sudden when he and his brothers really get going, it gets to a point where he can't deal with it, and he crawls off and goes into the other room. So don't hesitate to use the great resources of families. I can't say enough for that when you're working hand in hand with the family, and vice versa. Sometimes at school, you guys have done miraculous things, and I love it when you choose to videotape it if it's possible and show it to the parent and say, this is how we're getting this done at school. I don't know that it's going to work at home that way, but we just want you to know at school this does happen. Because, you know, and I'll give my own personal example, and that is every year in the fall when they had open house, I'd go to school. I have two daughters, and my younger daughter, they would say, oh, it's the 6th week of school, and Erin talked to me for the first time today. And I think, and she will not shut up from the time she comes home until the time she falls asleep. So it's a whole different person sometimes, too. So that's a good reminder for me always to think in terms of there are differences in things for me to learn from the family and for the school to learn from the family too, and for the family to learn from school. Okay, here are some of the challenges, and the challenge in general ed and even in special ed education for kids are the assessment tools are inappropriate for so many of these students. They're geared to be using your hearing and your vision, period. So those tests are not appropriate in most cases. The learning pace, I get so excited. I have to tell you, Katie just commented to me, it's okay to pause and breathe, Kathee. And I have to tell you, I just get excited about this group of kids and how many wonderful things happen. I just get excited and I keep talking too fast. So thanks, Katie, for the reminder. Also, the pace at which we go. The pace in school is fast. That's all it's to it. And this group of students don't do fast if you want them to learn. So what I'd like to do is show a video, I think, yes. And this is a young man, and the first shot you're going to see is him on a treadmill. And this was actually when he was older. And then we're going to go back and show you some of the things that were happening for him when he was younger. He was probably about 8 when he was younger, and he was 16 in the first shot when you see him on the treadmill. He does just have a very short stature, for those of you who are a little bit surprised. So if we'll go ahead and click the white play button, see that?
Christopher. How can we get him to use his walker? We all need a reason to work hard. He moves closer because he has a reason to take a step.
Okay, now with Christopher, you probably saw some differences too. He is very short in stature even today, and he's now, this makes me feel even older than I usually feel. I met him when he was about 3, and I think he's about 19 now. One of the things about Christopher and about the children is they need to move as much on their own as they possibly can. And they need the time, and they need the motivation. And as that video showed, he had a reason. That toy that had reflection on it, and he has cortical vision impairment, and for some kids with cortical vision impairment, shiny things are very interesting to them. Once Kelly, the paraeducator, hit the toy so it would spin, he got reminded, like, oh yeah, that's right, that's over there. And he could see it because the movement was occurring for him. When it was still and not moving, he didn't see it. And he really sees pretty well, about 8 inches from his eyes. So he has both a visual impairment and a cortical vision impairment, both. So that can happen for some kids. Were there any things that you noticed about him that were different from the other students besides his short stature? You know, one of the things that I have always appreciated about Christopher is he didn't enjoy moving. He would definitely let you know that he didn't like crawling, he didn't like putting one knee in front of him. And this team really got it, that the more movement he did, the faster the communication would grow for him. And so I think that's an important thing too. And from Crystal, the wait time was perfect so that he could make it there without being pushed. The only thing Kelly did was put her hands on his hips to help stabilize his trunk so that the walking was easier for him. So once again, it's that helping him to do it. And Marina, oh, I'm still trying to download the video. Okay. Some of the other demands that we're talking about is the whole issue of the fatigue factor. And I related to that a little bit earlier, but we have school going so fast, and the demands visually and auditorily are so great that the student fatigues quickly. And one of the things Marissa didn't share, excuse me, I've got allergies. One of the things Marissa didn't share is that there are times for her that she needed the tactile signing because her eyes were exhausted. And she used her interpreter for that purpose too. How do we help the students get a break? I don't mean lay down and take a nap for 30 minutes. I mean give a break to their vision. For those of us who work in front of a computer a lot, we all know that we need to take a break from it. Some of us don't, but we should, because our eyes would not be as tired as they are. So how do we help the students get a break when they need it, to give some release to that fatigue? For some of the children, sitting in their wheelchairs for so much of the day and not getting out of them, on the floor, into other kinds of vehicles, whether it's a bike or a rowing machine or something, that's an issue too, because what happens is, we're only sitting here for an hour and a half today, but it's been at the end of a long day. If you go to an 8-hour workshop or a 2-day 8-hour workshop, you know that very quickly, at least within the first 2 to 3 hours, your buns you're starting to get sore, you're getting gritchy, your whole brain is starting to shut down. It can't do more. And you need to get up and move. We give breaks. We tell people to, get up and, go get a drink, go walk if you need to. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And that's because we want you as alert as possible. And for kids who have to sit in a wheelchair or in the same place day after day for the amount of time that we have them, it's very hard on them to try to stay alert. So we have to find ways to help that. Another challenge is the demands of the school day and the schedule. We're scheduled. We've got to go. Now we've got to do this. Now we've got to do that. Lunch is only from this time to this time. So how could I possibly give him 45 minutes to have his lunch when we only have a half hour or 25 minutes or whatever? And then the number of people who work with the individual student. And this is a real important one for the students who have a combined vision and hearing loss, and especially those with additional disabilities. And that is, they have to learn to trust every single one of those people. And trusting and developing a relationship takes time. And that very often we think we don't have, or for some people who are like paraeducators working with a teacher, they're expected to get a certain amount done within that amount of time. So it's real important that they first have an opportunity to develop a relationship. No trusting relationship with anyone, especially when they go to a new school, unless somebody is going with them who they have a prior relationship with. Do you or your staff have the philosophy that everyone in the environment needs to work with this student? I would like to challenge you about that in the beginning. And please hear the word "in the beginning." The child needs to develop a relationship, and a trusting one, with a couple people, 1 or 2 people, in the beginning. because you can pay now or pay later. You pay now by allowing them to really get a firm relationship in, and then later you start branching out and meeting more people because you trust and because those people know how to interact with you so that they'll understand you. Okay, or you don't do it in the beginning and then you start to have behavior problems, or that student just moves more and more into himself and withdraws. And isolation is the biggest issue for this group of children. When you talk to deafblind adults, they will talk about the increasing isolation. The lack of understanding concepts that everyone else already knows since they can hear and see. So I'll use, what concepts does your student or your child have? Without concepts, vocabulary is useless. And we work with students who can read the words and have no idea what they just read. They have no idea what that word means. But by gosh, I can read that word, banana or doctor or whatever the word is. I can read that word, but I have no idea what doctor means. So a rose is a rose is a rose. It can be yellow. It can be lavender. It can be black nowadays. It can be red. It can be variegated colors. But they're all roses. Some have a great smell. Some don't smell at all. Some are very long-stemmed. Some have very bad thorns. Others have weaker, softer thorns. There are so many differences, but they are all called a rose. And this group of students get this one idea of what this means, and to them, that's the only thing that's a spoon. The spoon you've been feeding me with for the last 4 years, that's what a spoon is. You put a metal spoon in or a plastic spoon in my hand, and I have no idea that that's a spoon. So the concept of work, okay, we'll just use that quickly because it's so varied. And how many of you have either signed, said, or indicated in some way, it's time to work? Work now, play later. Work, time to work. So what does work mean to the student? So some ideas are, I'm working in exercise, and for me, that happens to be work. For some of you, it's a joy. It's fun. Okay? Recycling can be work because maybe that's my job. I am a recycler. I pick up the recycling at your curbside every Tuesday. Or I'm working at the computer and I'm doing an assignment for my college class. Or I'm working in a factory and I have one specific task to do within that factory. Or I'm now working on the laundry and I'm folding things out of the dryer. Or I'm a beekeeper and I work with bees. And that's just a tiny bit, as you well know, of what work is. And then there are all the concepts around work, such as if I'm at a factory, it's a big place, it's noisy, and I have to push that time card down. Or if I'm in an office, it's a computer and my neck starts to hurt after an hour of working at the computer. Or I put labels on things, or outside I'm working, and with us we saw the bees, so there's the bee sting, it's hot. I have to be careful. Folding towels, soft, warm, smells good. Recycling. Shaping. What are the shapes of the things I'm recycling? Are they clean? Am I smashing things? Cooking breakfast can be work. Turning on the microwave, finding food items on the shelf, waiting for someone to be off a machine if I'm working out for exercise, counting the number of repetitions I'm doing something. And then there's the issue of the verb of I will work, I worked, I am working, I don't want to work, those kinds of things. So what I'd like you to do is I actually want to go back and I want to show one last video. And this is a young man who's a teenager, and this happens to be at his, I believe it's his grandparents' home. And I can't tell you how many times this student has been told it's time to work. So I want you to watch this video, and we're just getting it up now. And once again, the sound has been turned down so that you'll focus more visually on it, and we'll go ahead and play that one. And I would probably say that if somebody signed to him time to work, he wouldn't have associated that activity with work. That was more fun. I like that. They put the fun in functional. That's right. That's great, Crystal. And that is what it's all about. It is, what is his concept of work? What do you guess? He's a teenager. What do you guess he thinks work is? He has a significant vision impairment and he's profoundly deaf. And you feel free to go ahead and type some thoughts in your mind. What do you think he thinks work is? Or do you think he thought this was work? Maybe being with other people could be work, or a routine that he gets reinforcement to do. His therapies are work. There's a good possibility. Fun time with his family. A game. Those are the things that are not probably, a game might be work for him. It may be that he has to sit down at a table and he has to take turns and he has to wait for his turn. That may be the work. So just the concept of work is an issue that I challenge people to think about when you are signing or saying it's time to work. What does that really mean to the child? Is it something he doesn't like to do? A game might be work, right? Work is a team activity, someone signing and someone encouraging. And, I think he may think of work as a chore. And with the positive social interactions, he's participating fully. And the question is, does he do that with people he doesn't know? These were all people he knew very well. He can predict his family. They are consistent with him. He knows what's coming next. He knows the routine. I put the wood in, I wheelbarrow it over, I take it out, I jump in the wheelbarrow, and my dad pushes me back to the pile. And that's reinforcement, and it is work, but it may not be what we think of when we talk about work. Does he engage with people he doesn't know? So that would be one of my questions. How does he engage with people that he doesn't know? This was all very predictable, and it's one of those challenges that schools have, and that is to be a predictable environment. They have predictable rules. Kids are expected to follow those rules. However, on Wednesday afternoon, we're shortening all the periods so that we can have a pep rally for the football game. So now my schedule is not predictable. You're changing everything on me. So I want you to so be thinking about that whole idea of when we're planning for success, we now know some of the major challenges that this group of students and many of the kids that you all work with are faced with. And so I'd like you to take just a minute, and I'd like you just to quickly type for those of you who are willing to participate again, and I've been so grateful to those of you who are. Just jot, what are the challenges? What are the things you have to look at, you have already looked at, or you're in the midst of thinking about that you have to look at that are challenges for this group of students? Just name them. Anybody can type in. Great. Finding routines that are enjoyable. Finding functional activities. How to engage my student. What works best to keep him engaged. Finding activities they enjoy. Safety using tools and how much support is needed. Predictable equals a safe environment and known expectations, so any change in the schedule does create or can create a meltdown if you haven't prepared for it. Modifying multiple environments throughout the school day. Symbolizing, what symbolizes work in their tactile schedule? What are the things that motivate the child? Finding things of interest again. Waiting, taking turns. Work with parents whose kids are birth to 3. Okay, making this understandable to them so that we can start thinking of things. Look at them differently right now. What are some home routines we can start, and why are those routines so important? Keeping a routine, not just developing one, but actually keeping it. But then finding variety in activities, changing things. My preschool classroom is very busy with children art and toys and the likes. Also, it's occasionally loud. Or we have music playing, making a typical preschool room more acceptable without getting rid of the things that are typical to preschool. And so I would agree with that, and I would challenge that sometimes what we do, whether it's in preschool or any other classroom, it's because we've done it that way, and the question is, should we be continuing to do it that way? The amount of kids who are suffering hearing loss at a much earlier age suggests to me that we have to help find some ways to not just quiet the classroom, but quiet a lot of areas in our lives. Even in a deaf classroom, with the child who's far behind others developmentally, how do we adapt everything? And the answer to that, Fran, is you don't. You find those things that make sense to adapt because he can relate to them. If he doesn't have the concepts, just like we talked about work, what about the concept of I'll just use toileting as one, and that is the concept of wet. I've talked with people, and they said, we want him to tell us when he's wet so he can change. And my response is, so does he know the concept wet? Well, I said, there's not a gene that tells us inside our body that we're wet. It might tell me that I'm uncomfortable and I'm crying, but I don't know what the right word is to let you know that I'm wet and I need to be changed. Jean's talking about teaching partners in routines, how to focus on communication, all of those things. And I think that I'm just going to finish up with just a few more slides, but I'm going to have Michaela go ahead and put in the place for you to do the evaluation for today. No real interaction and communication opportunities for students, period. That's all it's to it, and the number of opportunities, and I think Jean mentioned that in particular. Using, how do you communicate? Have you ever used a piece of artificial turf as a way to let the child know that you're going to go outside and that's what this means, we're going to go play on the grass? Or have you ever placed your hand under a child's to show him how to open a door instead of putting your hand on top of his and forcing it? Have you ever given a child a choice by saying choices and the child hitting his switch when he heard the choice he wanted? So shall we go outside and play? I don't hear it. Shall we shall we play in the water? So it's a yes, please. So it may be using a switch that way. An environment that changes often, that's another issue. And we talked a little bit about that. Sensory overload, visual and auditory. Noise levels that make it difficult for the student to use his functional hearing. And have you ever considered a life that could be described like this? You will have few close friends in your life. You will experience long hours of doing nothing day after day. Someone will do almost everything for you and to you the rest of your life. You may understand little of what people say to you, and they may understand even less of what you want to say. You will not participate in recreation activities that you might find enjoyable, and your experience of community life will be limited. So I ask you, this is a life of isolation, and this is what a lot of these students experience. And our goal, and we hope your goal, is to not let that life be isolated or have any of us contribute to the isolation for these students. So this is actually the last, this is the end. Also, have you ever wondered how many people in your district or agency have experienced working with children who have a combined vision and hearing loss? And I will tell you, in most cases, very few or none, because there are so few of these students. There are very few training programs for this group of students. And school districts don't generally hire a teacher of the children who have a combined vision and hearing loss or deafblind. Number one, you can't find them. They're very hard to find. And this is a book that I would recommend for those of you who would like to get more information about what a program should look like, and the guidelines that are federally suggested you can get from this place. And also a reminder that next Tuesday we're going to get on into the piece about actually planning, assessment and planning for the success. And today was about who are these kids and the diversity of these kids. So I appreciate everybody's participation. It's been great, even though I don't get to hear you all talk, and you just have to hear me talk. I hope things were helpful, and we'll move on next week. And anybody who's got, just a reminder, take that survey, please. The www.surveymonkey.com/S/VRZ9RHQ. If you would please take that, it's quick, I promise you. And with that, I just would like to tell you all, have a great evening, and thanks for being here and supporting this very small group of students. We appreciate it. Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Michaela. Appreciate all the help.